Hello and welcome to the Night Owl Philanthropy podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones, and in this series I ask charity leaders and change makers to tell us about their why, the purpose, values and experiences that drive their work. Each episode goes beyond campaigns and job titles to uncover the real stories and motivations behind social impact leadership, exploring what it takes to stay resilient, purposeful and compassionate in a demanding sector. Today we're leaning into those themes through child poverty, grant making and practical action, and I'm delighted to welcome Josephine McCartney, Chief Executive of the Childhood Trust, a charity supporting organisations across London that are working to improve the lives of children and young people affected by poverty, deprivation and inequality. Josephine, thank you so much for joining me. Let's begin, as we always do, with that key question. What is your why? What's at the heart of your work in this particular area of the charity sector?
So our why, our mission, is to alleviate the impact of poverty for children living in London today. And for us, that actually means practical action in terms of how we support organisations and the children and young people that they then support. But I think also it's about ensuring that we are reaching those children and young people who are most at need in London, and really that we are providing support for activities that impact children right now. Because whilst lots of organisations are in the campaigning space and the kind of policy change space, we are about helping the children that need that help today, rather than the systemic change that's required to actually address child poverty, which is much, longer term.
Thank you. And so when people ask what you do, how do you usually describe your role at the Childhood Trust?
I mean, I suppose I say similar to what I've just said, really, is that our job, we play a vital role, is what I often say. We play a vital role in the whole child poverty space, but the job of the Childhood Trust is about positive action now. So for us, that really is the difference between, I suppose, the work that we do as a grant maker versus some of the other child poverty charities that operate in the same space that we do.
And what first drew you into work with children, families and communities? I know you've got a background in the charity sector, and one area in particular with community foundations, which touches into this work a little bit. But what was it, do you think, that drew you into this work more generally?
I think it's the general sense that if you can support children at an early age, you start the prevention of potential problems that happen later on in life. I was asked to chair a children and young people steering group in Kent about 8 years ago, almost now. And I've had to give that role up to start my sort of work in London. But that really gave me a deep insight into all of the challenges that children and young people face, and not just how that sort of steering group evolved. Was that we ended up thinking obviously about the wider context. So the family unit, how do you support the parents? What does that look like? From children who are young carers, to children who have special education needs, to children living in poverty. So, all the sort of challenges around childhood and mental health, which obviously was quite a big thing during the pandemic. So it really gave me a real deep understanding of the challenges that families face, especially in the most challenging times. And that gave me a real grounding for then thinking and considering doing the job of Chief Executive of the Childhood Trust.
And as we've alluded to, you've worked across fundraising, grant making, and obviously charity leadership as part of that. What have those different parts of your career taught you about where change really happens? Because you talked about the immediacy of the work that you do with the Childhood Trust.
Yeah.
And changes.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose where you see change happening is in, I think, in strong leadership. So even in organisations where I've been part of a senior leadership team, the whole motivation for how the organisation operates and the culture of the organisation is driven by the ambition, I think, and the passion of the person at the top. And I think if you don't have that, it does have an effect on the rest of the organisation. So I think for me, change happens when you have people who are passionate about the cause that they are representing or leading. And I've saw that through my whole career. Whether it's been my direct line managers, as I've sort of moved up the ladder, or from board members, really inspiring chairs of boards. So, and also change happens when real change happens when people are committed to what they are trying to achieve and that their mission is clear. I think that's when change happens.
With the various episodes that I've experienced so far in this role as sort of host of a podcast, quite often I find that passion comes from a personal experience or being touched personally in some way by the cause that they're supporting. Do you have that experience yourself? Is there something that has drawn you specifically to this area of the sector, do you think? Or is it just through seeing the impact that these instances and experiences are having on young people that's really touched you and forced you or giving you that impetus to kind of do what you do?
It's lived experience. So,
right.
so I grew up in, I suppose, how we define relative poverty versus deep poverty is how a lot of families are finding themselves in now, certainly not just in London, but across the UK. And so, yes, I was adopted by my grandparents.
Right.
They were retiring at the time or retired, and we didn't have much money. I had free school meals. I didn't often have enough period products as a young woman. Certainly second-hand clothes or cheap clothes. And I was thinking, why was my childhood still happy, and why was it not as challenging as the children that we see now in London? And I think mainly it was because when I was growing up, which, as a child, which was the early 70s and early 80s, we had a community of support. We had community centres, we had youth clubs, we had summer activity programs, we had swimming classes at school, we had playing fields, we had, track and field, we had music and skills, we had drama and dance, and it was all free. So even though the kind of material things for me were very real and I lived them, I think the whole community support that existed then, it made it much better. And so even though that is my lived experience, it's different. Everyone's experience of child poverty is different, of course. That you can't just box people into, well, this is my experience, therefore that must be your experience. But it's probably taken me the 14 months that I've been in this role now to kind of come to that conclusion myself about why did it feel differently for me? And why am I where I am now? What has led to that versus some of the outcomes that a lot of the children that we see and young people we see definitely are not going to get those opportunities, and it doesn't exist.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing your personal experience. I do appreciate that, but I think it's at the essence of what this podcast is all about. It is about your why and why that has then driven you on to do the things that you do as a charity leader. You touched on London, and obviously you're a London charity, a London-based charity. London's often seen as a city of opportunity, but the reality for many children is obviously very different. What does child poverty in London actually look like from your perspective? And I know you're keen not to kind of pigeonhole individuals or overgeneralize. There are all sorts of different situations that people could find themselves in. But what does it look like, do you think, if you can, to some extent, generalize those kind of things?
I think if you take, we are predominantly a grant maker, and that's absolutely right. It's what you've said. We do have an outreach project that we run, which is called Transforming Spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And that project is about decorating children's bedrooms.
Mm.
We get referrals from social work teams in the main. So they are children that are certainly in the system and are being sort of kept an eye on by a social worker, by the very nature of the role that they play. And so even if you just take, so we support about 200 children in that space every year directly. And the thing about those families is the situation that they live in. So and we see this time and time again. So there is a sort of a pattern in terms of the conditions that they have to live in, and the main thing really is the state of social housing in London. It is often horrendous, and what I mean by that is bare floorboards, damp, mold, drafty windows, doors that don't lock safely, high-rise flats in areas where there are people who have other challenges, substance misuse, gang violence. So these kids and their parents just don't have much at all, not even enough money they're paying their rent. They may have some family support, so they may have some benefits. But even with that, they don't have enough money to do a basic thing like decorate their children's bedroom. Often they won't have their own bed, or they're sleeping on a mattress on the floor. And it feels like, surely I must be exaggerating the conditions that some of these families live in, because this is London, right? The sixth wealthiest city in the world. How can we possibly have the highest levels of child poverty in the whole country? 38% of children in London live in poverty. We focus a lot on the children families who are living in deep poverty, and that's the description. So after they've paid their rent, they actually don't really have much money for anything else, and that might even include paying their bills. So they don't put their heating on. They will buy basic food. They don't have any money for luxuries. And when I say luxuries, I mean a winter coat or the right boots for their kids. They don't have the luxury of having a space for their children to do homework. They're often tired. They maybe not have money to buy breakfast in the morning. So unless you're in a borough where there's a breakfast club, or your school provides breakfast before the bell rings, you go to school hungry. And actually, the reality for us is that a lot of the families that we support are living in what is defined as deep poverty. And there's been a whole piece of research, Dean, just recently done by Department of Work and Pensions, and that's based on, of course, families that they know are on family credit, or are on any sort of personal PIP, or any of the other kind of universal credit. So they look across everything, free school meals, look across all of the types of income that these families will be accessing. And their assessment says that 38% of children live in poverty. 20% of those in London live in deep poverty. That's a high number. And that comes from the government statistics. So we know that because we see it, but that's what it looks like for the families that we support. So it's pretty stark.
It is. Yeah. And thank you for reiterating that 38% again, because I think it's so important that people understand the extent of the issue and the challenge. That isn't, when you talked about the population of London, I mean, I don't know how many children there are in London amongst that sort of six. What do you have that figure as roughly?
Well, I have to do the calculation in my head, but the equation of 38% is over 700,000 children.
Wow. Okay.
Over 700,000 children. That's the number and when I speak to any stakeholder, that just feels like such a challenging number to get your head around. It feels like we're exaggerating it, but I did my own research on the GLA's website to try and understand sort of the population based on the indexes that they produce, and looking at all the statistics that they create. they're the ones that then say, well, that equates to 700,000 children. So it's not our stats, we've not exaggerated that for for sort of purposes of our case for support. That really is an evidenced number of children.
Yeah.
And it's the highest in the UK, as I was saying.
Yeah.
The percentage across the rest of the country is 28%, between 28% and 30%, and in London, 38%. So it's quite a difference.
It is. And obviously you previously were leading at Kent Community Foundation.
Yeah.
So you will have seen perhaps a difference between that geographic area and some of the sort of patterns in this area that we're talking about, and then being able to compare it with what you're seeing in London. Have you been able to put your finger on why there is a difference between London and anywhere else, perhaps in the UK?
I mean, the main difference, and I attended a national poverty conference in Manchester a few weeks ago, and and I was specifically talking about London in the context of the rest of the UK, and the biggest difference is the housing costs. So
Okay.
the biggest difference in terms of the general cost of living. So, according to government stats, even just as a basic, they will say that it costs at least £40,000. That's after tax. £40,000, net pay in order to actually pay your rent, pay your bills, and buy decent food, right? Have a anywhere near decent standard of living. Our living wage, not the legal wage, but the living wage in London is just over £26,500 gross.
Yeah.
And if you think about the number of families that are living in poverty in London, and by the very nature of the jobs that they do, most of them will be on minimum wage.
Yeah.
Most of them will be on minimum wage. So the biggest difference really is the housing cost, so rent. But also the cost of living in London is obviously a lot higher.
Yeah.
Than it is in the other parts of the country. And, if you compare it to Kent, which obviously where my previous role was, it's not to say that families didn't live in poverty, they really did.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the economics of it are just slightly different, in terms of their overall cost of living, even though it's still really, really challenging for families in Kent, and it really is. I think people think about, Kent as, the Garden of England, and it's the south, so surely that's wealthy, and it's just not. I mean, if you take Thanet as a kind of a one of the largest areas in Kent, it is it's the highest area of deprivation, 10% of the whole country. It's one of the highest areas of deprivation. And I think people, again, struggle to get their head around, it's the beaches and it's the coast and it's rural and it's, and they've got cathedrals. And you think about all the lovely things that you associate with Kent, but hidden amongst all of that is real deprivation. And so it's not much different to some of the families that we deal with. The challenges are the same. It's the economics that are different. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. You said while you were talking about London and the instances of poverty that because you can see it. So that's really interesting. I think there's another side to that, which is a side that a majority of us don't see it. And to a lot of us, the things that you see are hidden or less visible. And so we jump to conclusions about what these different things are. And what would you like to say about deprivation that people outside of the sector who don't see it, what do they miss? What aren't they seeing, do you think?
They're not seeing the shame that families feel. They're not seeing how children who are living in poverty don't really have a childhood because they don't get to experience the same things as other families. They don't get to see the worry that those children. I suppose it's when you get to an age where you are aware of the challenges that your parents have got. Like they're, worrying about paying the bills. They are buying cheap food. You are wearing clothes out of the charity shop. You know that you are not getting to do the same things as your friends at school. You start to be really aware of your existence, I suppose, and it's at that point where the shame starts to creep in. You don't want to invite your friends back to your house because it's not as nice as theirs. You avoid doing after school things because you can't afford it, because there isn't any money. And I think it's the experience that children have that people don't see. Rather, I can talk about the stats and I can talk about the, not enough money for food and all that sort of stuff, but it's actually what people don't see are how young people feel about it and what that means to them.
Yeah, thank you. And that wasn't the answer that I expected you to give, but I'm really pleased that you did, because what you're seeing is how people are feeling. And that's why it's hidden, because you can't see necessarily, but you can hear it when you hear your stories and you get to understand what sits beneath all of this.
Yeah.
How much of the challenge is about, I know when we started the interview, you talked about the grant making you're doing being about sorting out immediate challenges, trying to kind of trying to prevent some of the things that are having an effect on people right now.
Yeah.
So how much of what you're seeing is about immediate hardship, and how much is it about longer term effects on confidence and learning and life chances, the cycle, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I think it's a really good question. The thing for me is that the areas that we support are fairly broad, and they are sort of under four themes. So it's, children are healthy, children are confident, children are resilient, and children are safe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, the whole, how do you define what that means in a sort of an immediate intervention?
Mm-hmm.
And we know how children feel, and whether they're feeling more confident, happier, because of the way that we interact with the charities that we fund. So we try to be empathetic, because we, as a grant maker, we've all worked in the sector. So it's different to some grant makers where you may never have actually worked in a service delivery charity before, so you don't actually understand what it's actually like to be delivering services and how you gather data and insight into the impact that you have, which is a big thing for us.
Yeah.
And so we try and be understanding when we are asking for information from charities that we are funding, and we're asking them to demonstrate the impact or the difference our funding has made, or the work that they do.
Yeah.
We are very aware that in the situation of, children don't come to an activity and the charity doesn't say, well, can you can you provide evidence that you're living in poverty? They don't ask that question. They don't, they can see for themselves.
Yeah.
But the thing for us is that we know that from the feedback and the data and the cases that we receive from our partner charities that we fund, it's really clear of the immediate impact that it has. And we talk about we're actually about to do a piece of work with some students from Bayes Business School, actually, on the how do you know, or can you know, what the longitudinal effect of the work that you do with children now? So, and I was giving this example actually the other day, but I was thinking, so a young girl, an 8-year-old girl who has found out about Bloomsbury Football, right? Who run, like encourage young girls to get involved in football, right? That the football is the attraction. The reason why they do it is because they want to encourage young girls who may have nowhere else to go, or any confident or trusted adult or positive experiences, to get involved in something that might actually ultimately change how they feel about either themselves or their situation that they're in, or their aspirations for the future. Funding projects like a local football club or a rugby club or an arts club or a drama or a music or a film, whatever that is that gets kids to sort of start coming out of the shell, to experience things that they wouldn't normally experience. All those things For me are the things that really demonstrate impact. Whether that means that by the age of 15 or 16 they've chosen the right GCSEs or they're even stayed in school, we might never know that. We may never know that. But we do know at that moment in time that that kid who maybe came in and was a bit shy or wasn't confident or didn't have like friends outside of school or had just different experiences, having a positive experience with trusted adults and being exposed to other young people from lots of different backgrounds absolutely changes how they feel about themselves and the world around them. And it will, it's not going to do anything other than give them a positive experience. So that, if that's what it does and it makes them feel more confident, then kind of the projects we're funding are doing their job. And we can only hope that, that somewhere along the line that actually is that intervention, forever how long that intervention lasts, is the thing that then leads that young person to make the right decision as they go forward in life. So, but it's a really, have these conversations all the time about, what happens with immediate intervention versus long-term, education. Why aren't you just funding better education projects in schools? Because for us, the wraparound support and services are just as important as the education. That's how we see it at the Childhood Trust.
Great, thank you so much for that. The Childhood Trust works, as you've already alluded to, all 32 London boroughs. I think it's 32, wasn't it? Isn't it? Why is there a citywide approach, and why is that important, do you think, to the foundation? Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, I mean, the reason really is that because there is deprivation in all parts of London and there's child poverty in all parts of London, the highest levels of poverty, and I was talking about that 38%, in places like Hackney and places like Tower Hamlets, that actual percentage goes up to more than 51%. And so the east of London does have the highest areas of recorded child poverty in London. But right across, even to Richmond, that has the least number of children recorded as living in poverty, it still exists. So for us, if you just focus on the highest areas, what about all the children who are living in the other boroughs who are still experiencing quite severe poverty, but because it's perceived as an area that's wealthier or has a higher percentage of families who are earning more than the average, doesn't mean to say that there aren't families who are living there who are not living in poverty. So for us, the whole pan-London approach is about ensuring we reach with the minimum amount of money we've got. Of course, we are one small grant-making organisation, but reaching out through our network of that sort of 150 and hopefully growing in future means that we can reach a lot more children than we would be able to reach on our own if we were just doing this work on our own. So that's the sort of reason behind the Childhood Trust predominantly being a grant maker.
Great, thank you. And as I say, you're a grant maker. So what does that mean in practice for the charities and community organisations that you support? Yeah.
So we run practically we run two campaigns a year. And we do those campaigns through the Big Give platform. Don't know if you've... Yeah. And basically the Big Give platform allows charities to double the donations that they receive. So not to make it complicated, we are a champion funder for the Big Give. So what we do is we each year put up around 2.3 million pounds as the funder.
Yeah.
And then charities apply for that funding through the Big Give platform. When they apply for that funding, we then carry out our own due diligence on those organisations, mainly to make sure they're operating in London and they're working with children who are living in poverty at a very, very basic level.
Yeah.
And if they meet that criteria, then we will assess them on their ability to achieve the match give. So the whole point is that we work with organisations to give them that seed money, that match money that sits there. They then use that as leverage to go and speak to all of their donors about accessing funding. So it gives them the reason to speak to their donors. And you'll know this more, Dean, but so speak to those donors and basically, in effect, say that if you give us a donation now, that will unlock this amount of pot of money that we've been given by the Childhood Trust. So, so we basically provide the money that gives the charities that opportunity to go and find the money from other donors.
It incentivizes their existing pool of donors. Yeah.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And hopefully and ideally, attract new donors, because that's the point, isn't it? It's about building sustainability and resilience into the sector.
That is a really great example of partnership and collaboration, a really broad 360 kind of partnership and collaboration. So you've got the big give, and then you're also working with those other charitable organisations. They're then incentivized to work with their donors. So you've got this pool of people who are interested in this area around childhood poverty, and that are all pooling together to make a difference. That's great. What a great model.
I know. I mean, it is a great model, and I don't know any donor that I've ever spoken to in my 25 years in the sector that doesn't love a match fund.
Yeah.
You know, it's about unlocking money that we've committed to those charities, and it is the incentive. And outside of that, as a grant maker, we also support the charities, especially if you're a small grassroots organisation, with the fundraising. So we do Get Campaign Ready, as we call them, events where we bring charities who are really experienced in the big give model, so understand how it works, and from a recipient charities perspective. And they then train, so it's a peer-to-peer support, they then train all the smaller charities on how to make it work. So how do you maximise on the opportunity? And as well as that, we are currently developing what we call our Thrive Together programme, and that is about how do we help support with sort of advice, access to resources, policies, safeguarding, a directory of all the other charities that operate in the child poverty space in London, connect those charities up, think about collaboration, facilitate that discussion on how do you improve your service delivery, how do you ensure that you can signpost families that need support. That may not be your role of your charity, but maybe the charity in the same borough that you didn't actually know existed. All of that. So there's that's the future of grant making for us. That's what that looks like. So it's not just about the money, it's about the resilience and the sustainability, because we want those charities to exist in future, because otherwise we can't, as one charity, address child poverty in London. We need the network in order for that to happen. They need our funding and we need them. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
That's great, thank you. And it's obviously not just about distributing funds. You're providing a much broader service than that. Does that service also require your own fundraising? Do you have to do your own fundraising for the? You do.
Yeah. So this is my experience from my previous role, because community foundations operate in a very similar way. So basically, we can't give out what we don't raise. So if we don't raise the money, we can't give it out. We actually don't have a cushion. So there's no endowment. So most grant makers operate from an endowment perspective. It's very rare for a grant maker to also be fundraising at the same time. The community foundations do that.
Yes.
And the Childhood Trust does that. And there will be other sort of.
So you do have an
outliers.
endowment, you said?
No, we don't.
You don't have an endowment, right? Wow.
No, we don't. Most trusts and foundations have an endowment. That's what they use. So they are purely grant makers for that reason. If you take any of the large grant makers across the whole UK, they are working from an endowment. So invested money, they draw down either income or units from that endowment every year, and that's what they use for the grant making. We don't have that. If we don't go out and if I don't have this conversation all the time and my fundraising team with donors for us, we then can't do our work and fund all of our network. So we perform both roles, which means we also completely understand the challenges of fundraising and completely understand the charities that we're funding as well. So we, like community foundations, we sit in a unique place. But the downside to that is that if we don't raise money, and it's very challenging at the moment, it does have a much wider impact than just the Childhood Trust. And that's my sort of case for support, I suppose, for donors. It's like, when you fund us, you're not just funding us, you're funding the whole network.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's an education for me. I made an assumption that you would have had an endowment, and the fact that you don't.
No.
I suppose the side to that I like about it is it gives you a motivation or an impetus to do things, because it's not likely to be the case, but if you're sitting on a big endowment, then your own sense of urgency that isn't necessarily there in terms of your own survival. So maybe that's a good thing, but I don't know. It's more painful, isn't it?
It's more stressful.
Yeah.
It's definitely more stressful.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a bit like, you have to make the commitment, and then you have to frantically raise the money in the background to ensure that you can meet that commitment.
Yeah.
It's part of the role. It's definitely, it's not for the faint-hearted, is what I would say.
Right. Yeah. So on that, how do you decide which organisations are the best fit for your funding? I know you mentioned right at the beginning about the immediacy of what you're trying to achieve, trying to solve problems. But are there particular things that you're really looking for? I'm assuming it's not just about it. I think you mentioned about sustainability as well. I'm assuming there's an element of that in there.
I mean, actually, it's about impact.
Okay.
So, there's a couple of things, but so for me, it's about impact and how you can demonstrate that as an organisation, whether it's grassroots through case studies, or whether it's data analysis because you're a bit of a larger organisation and you actually can do that sort of thing. But for me, what's actually more important is we should be funding the organisations that have the biggest impact. And that's not just about numbers. That might be interventions with a small group of young people, which is going to have a significant impact on those young people's lives. So for us, the whole criteria of funding outside of the basics, you're London-based, you're child poverty focused, it's not about that. I think the evolution of our grant making is very much about how are you helping those young people and those children, and also the touch points that I was talking about. So when money is tighter, and it has been this time around, do we fund one-off interventions like respite holidays or trips to rural farms if you're inner city kids? So do you do those? Or do you fund projects where there's a continual touch point for those young people, where there's more likely a chance of being able to have a longer term influence and impact on their lives?
Is there an answer to that, or is it a bit about just getting the balance right?
It's trying to get the balance right. I think. I don't think. I mean, we're never going to get it right. We do speak to the charities. One thing I would say is that we're not remote. So, and I speak to the chief execs of a lot of the charities that we fund as well, to try and understand the challenges that they've got, to try and understand the young people or children that they support. And so that we can make the right decisions with the limited resources that we've got, because unfortunately we just don't have the money to fund everyone. And sometimes those decisions are really tough, Dean. They're not easy decisions to make, but I never shy away from having those conversations with either the fundraising directors or whoever runs the charity to help understand their position, but also to help them understand why we've made the decision, and maybe give more in-depth feedback or support to those organisations, rather than say, well, I'm sorry, we can't fund you this year. But, grant maker gets it right, and we're no exception to that. We try our very best to make the right decisions based on the information we've got and what we know, but you won't always get it right.
No. And you're always learning.
You're always learning. That's what I would say. We are always learning. From the sector is what we're always doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if we think about the children behind that 38%, or in Hackney you mentioned it was 52%, which is just unbelievable, isn't it? If you think about the actual children behind those statistics, what kinds of outcomes matter most to you, to the organisation?
I mean, the outcomes for us is about helping those children to feel that they've been seen and that they've been heard. Yeah. So we're interested in funding and supporting organisations that engage the young people that they help in the design of their services, and hearing directly from young people themselves about the difference it's made. So even though we're a grant maker, to talk authentically about the impact that you have, you need to speak to those children, young people, or the mums and dads, if they're, if it's like little tiny kids. But it really is about being able to speak directly to those young people and being able to speak directly to those families about what's important to them. That's how you know whether you're making a difference, actually, if you hear. But what we hear from those children and young people is that this, what I was saying before, is about how do you help a child to not feel ashamed of living in poverty? How do you help that young person to have hope for the future if they finding it really tough? How do you help those children and young people to feel heard? And we, through our direct service provision of our Transforming Spaces project,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll know what this means, but it's a trauma-informed approach, which in its basic form just means we ask them, what is it you want? What is it that is going to make a difference to you? And at basic level for us, in terms of our children's bedrooms, we work with them to design their own bedrooms, to ask them what it is that they want, to kind of say what would make you happy, or what's going to help you, like a desk to do your homework, because actually you live in quite a tiny house and you normally do your homework on your kitchen table, and it's actually really busy because mum's trying to make dinner and there's a toddler at the table, and all of that really basic stuff. But what we hear young people say is that to have agency in what happens to them, so you're not just done to, that someone thinks, well, that's a great idea, why don't we just deliver that service?
How do you know if you haven't asked them?
You haven't actually asked the young people what it is that would make a difference to them. But the biggest thing that they say is that we need to be heard. And we need to actually just know that somebody cares enough to want to hear about what's important to us. And there's been a lot of work recently, I would say. So as I say, we never work in isolation because we really respect the wider sector and the research and the work that other organisations are doing. And there is a lot of work at the moment around youth and also early years intervention. So what do young parents tell charities they need for their babies and their toddlers, as well as what do young people tell the youth organisations that we support? What are they saying to them? A lot of that is about, so here is the biggest feedback that a lot of the youth organisations get. You keep asking us what it is that we want, and we tell you, and then nothing changes.
Right. So it's listening, not just hearing it.
Yeah. It's the
or the other way around.
You said we did, and there's a lot of you said, and there's not enough of we did, what I'd say. And then young people get really frustrated with that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What are the sort of short-term interventions that feel most important right now, do you think? I know you mentioned you're doing your own work around the kitting out bedrooms. Are there specific things that when you talked about immediacy that really should be sorted out right now?
Yeah, I think access to youth provision, and I don't mean I don't just mean children who are not in education, employment, or training. So I don't mean the needs kids necessarily.
Generally, yeah.
I mean, generally, where are the after school clubs? Where are the local? Where is the free local community activities that children and young people can get involved in, that parents can take young kids to? There's some brilliant charities. So there's two charities one's called Youth Zone and the other one is called Baby Zone. And the Youth Zone, obviously the older kids, and that happens in the evenings after school. And then during the day when the youth centre is not, it's a brilliant model, when the youth centre is not being used by the young people because they're at school, it's used by the young parents who have the babies and toddlers. And that's about accessing, everything is free. And the charity and the sector pays for all of that. That's what I would say. Or the sector pays for all of that. I think we need more of that, and we need more of the immediate intervention for me. So it is more after school and youth club type activity, but also we need better intervention in early years. Because if you get it right in early years, it kind of feels like a really obvious thing, and every early years charity will say it. We've been saying this for years and nothing ever changes. You know, the whole kind of, how do you ensure that the parents who are struggling have the right support to ensure that their kids are ready for school?
Mm-hmm.
You know, potty trained,
Mm-hmm.
reading and writing basics of, you know, social skills that are required, you know, how, so you've got the early years, early intervention, which if you can do it then, then that's setting those kids up for a much better outcome. But if
It's
you
sort of
haven't done
scaffolding,
that,
isn't it?
it's scaffolding, it absolutely
Yeah.
is. And
Yeah.
not just for the, not just for the children, but for the parents who may be struggling with the whole, you know, how do you parent in this century with everything else, the first world problems for lots of people, and probably what feels a bit like third world problems for a lot of these families. Like, how do you just navigate your way through that? So I would say that if there was more investment, and that's the plan, but if there's more investment in that sort of after school and activities that
Mm-hmm.
help children gain that confidence, that will have a knock-on effect on their outcomes at school. It inevitably will, and that's been eroded, I think, over by several governments. It's not any one particular party's issue, but we've ended up in a situation where that provision, as I was saying, from, you know, kind of, I suppose that erosion started in the late 80s, where it's just compounded by every government, and it feels it's become a systemic problem now,
Yeah.
because it's built up over like 20, 30 years, and that's how you end up in the situation we have now, and significant investment is required to turn that around. While governments and consecutive governments try and fix that over here, all the charities we support are coming up with their own ways of providing that type of service
Mm-hmm.
by sticking plasters and
Yeah.
operating on a shoestring and volunteers and, you know, pro bono support and people giving them stuff for free. And because that's what you do, isn't it? That's what the sector's always done. Where there's no statutory provision, the voluntary sector will always step up, and they will always do it because there's always going to be a need. That was a very long-winded answer, but
Not at all. No, that was great. That was great. I mean, I think in order to do the work that you're doing, and for all those organisations you talked about to do the work they're doing, there has to be some kind of vision, doesn't there, about what good looks like.
yes.
And if you were able to wave your magic wand, what would the world look like for young people in London and beyond? What sort of things do you think? It's a big question to ask, because there are all sorts of things that you could answer, but
Yeah.
what does good look like for young people in London?
So I went to the annual Mayor's Fund for London conference just before Easter.
Mhm.
And the thing that I heard from all the young people that were talking was really it's access to opportunities.
Okay.
It's that. So if you grow up in a family where you get the opportunity to go to university, or you have a family where your mum and dad work, or they may work in an industry where it then allows that young person to have a week's work experience, or they may have access to an apprenticeship, or they may, you know, be able to do an internship, or that, you know, or they have the opportunity to go on to further education, or they have a course in school that opens up those opportunities. I think for lots of young people, that's what they say they lack. So it's not lack of ambition, really, even. It's not lack of the desire to want to do something different with their lives. It feels to them, and they're the most important, isn't it? It feels to them that there's a real lack of opportunity when you grow up in poverty, because your parents don't have the access to a lot of that sort of stuff, and your schools won't be feeder schools for companies who may be looking for, and I don't even mean graduates, I mean, you know, apprenticeships, or just talent. You know, we were saying that, you know, with that lack of opportunity for young people, we are missing out on a whole generation of talent
Yeah.
that has never been nurtured, because they never got the opportunity to shine or show what they're capable of doing, because they haven't had the opportunity to move on to further education or university or an apprenticeship or access to just work. So that's what they are telling us that is the
And I
problem at the
suppose
moment.
the absence of those things also creates this drive and fire and desire that's so useful when you actually reach those environments. You know, in terms of the passion that you talked about to kind of do the work that you do, that ingredient is so valuable, really, isn't it? So it's such a shame that they can't take that drive, desire, and fire into and have the opportunities to utilize them to the best of
I
their
know,
ability.
because you see, I mean, somebody said to me the other day, I despair of the youth of today. It's like that kind of, like I said about, oh, they don't, that is not my experience. It's,
Yeah,
that they're craving the opportunity
yeah,
to show
yeah.
what they can do. It's terrible that you meet young people. I mean, it's creeping into graduates as well now. Like I chair a Bank of England citizens panel, and you hear from young people from all walks of life saying that actually they've kind of given up hope of ever getting a job in the industry that they have trained, in, because there just is a lack of opportunity. And I think so if you take away the education element of it as well, for
Mhm.
most of the families and the children that we support, where do they get that opportunity? And it's definitely not for the lack of ambition or want or desire.
Yeah,
But eventually, like anything in life, if it gets beaten out of you, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah,
ultimately, you just think, well, this is my lot, then I'll
yeah.
just. And you don't want that lot.
Like what you were saying about you said we did, and when we don't, you kind of lose faith and lose hope, don't you?
Yeah,
So
you do.
yeah,
Because you
yeah,
think,
it's
well, I've told you
self-perpetuating.
this, and nothing changes. And where are the opportunities for all the inner city kids and all the kids that go to the comprehensives where, there's 35 to a class and
Mm,
that, there's no one-to-one support or, identifying talent, which is not about sort of the academic space. And there was a lot of discussion as well around, so if you're not academic, you're written off because the
mm,
education system needs a bit of a shake up in terms of I get it. I get there's not enough money, there's not enough teachers, there's not enough classroom space, there's not enough, support for children who have additional needs. I mean, all of that is happening.
yeah,
So it's not any one individual's fault, and it's certainly not the fault of the teachers or the schools. But within that system, how do you create those opportunities? There's got to be to do it.
mm,
And that was the conversation that we had at the Mayor's Fund for London event. It
yeah,
was that.
yeah. Do you feel the sort of policy conversation around child poverty is moving in a hopeful direction, or it's there? I mean, I can sense there's still a long way to go, but do you feel like there's a sense of momentum in the right direction? Um,
Yeah, I do. So the question that I was asked at the poverty conference that I was at, I was saying a few weeks ago, was what gives me hope for the future. And I was saying that the thing that gives me hope for the future is at least now we have a child poverty strategy.
yeah,
At least now we
that's
have
about
the
the
lift.
vision, isn't it? So
At
yeah.
least now we have the lifting of the two-child benefit cap.
Mhm,
You know, despite, there's so much more we need to do. We need to review the whole benefit system that,
mhm,
because it has a different impact in London, not as well as other parts of the country. The fact that there is a lot of conversation and discussion. Rachel Reeves met last week at number 10 Downing Street with the Child Poverty Action Group
mhm,
and their challenge to government at the moment on, the vision is there for the child poverty strategy, but where's the detail?
yeah,
Like what are you actually doing? Like where is the measurements of success? So you
mhm,
asked me that question, what does success look like?
mhm,
The government can't answer that at the moment.
mm,
It's too big a problem, really, I suppose, to
yeah,
solve. But there's no real measurements of success, even the steps of, where are the
mm,
milestones? Where are the
mm,
things that actually you can say this strategy is working because
mm,
we have achieved X, Y, and Z?
mhm,
And if you don't have that, it will fail anyway, because if you don't have measurement success along the way, how do you know
yeah,
you're getting there? Any strategy has to have those key milestones And I think that's what's missing from the child poverty strategy. But there, at least we have one now. At least there's a focus on child poverty. At least the ministers are taking it seriously. What they ultimately do about it, that's another question. But there is agency for the charities operating in the child poverty space at the moment, and they are being invited around the table to have those conversations, and that has got to be a good thing.
Yeah. I think there's also a tendency, and I had a conversation recently with somebody called Bianca Robinson, who's the CEO for CEOs Sleep Out. And she was saying that sometimes we have a tendency to kind of lean on government for all the solutions to all of our problems, and that we should also recognize that as a society, those problems are all of our problems. They're all of our issues and challenges. Do you agree with that? And if that is the case, what is it then that we as a society can do more of to address some of these challenges and take some ownership and responsibility for the situations that we're all in? You know, most of us are in, some of us are in a privileged position, and therefore we're also in a position of power and influence.
I mean, there was a report that we fed into, which came out last year from the Poverty Commission. And that was all around societal change and society's view of poverty. And it did actually also come out in the conference that I was at recently. It comes out in every conversation really that we talk about, is the kind of, you know, as people, we need to acknowledge that poverty exists. We need to take away the stigma of it's the parents' fault, isn't it? Or people get themselves into this situation. As a nation, we find it quite challenging to have empathy where it doesn't exist for us. Unlike me, and I've obviously said about my background and where I come from. I think it's very hard if you haven't had an upbringing like that to have empathy and understanding, because you automatically assume, well, can't you get yourself out of that situation? Why are the parents not just getting a better job? Why aren't you upskilling yourself to then go and get a job, a better paid job? There is definitely a section of society who feel like that about people who live in poverty, or people who have to claim benefits, not through any fault of their own. And I think there's a general stigma around, you know, you used to have those terrible documentaries that were out about, you know, Benefit Street, and, you know, and how terrible it is for people to have to claim benefits, and we're all working and paying our taxes. Why should we be, you know, supporting other people who should just go and get a job? You know, and we live in that society. That is a society that most people don't want to acknowledge that we live in, but we do. And so there's that part of it. So you have the element of we have to be better at approaching poverty from a more human lens. So there's that side of it. And that's a societal thing for us. That's a cultural thing in the UK. So that's one thing. And that came out quite strongly in that Poverty Commission report, and in the conference that we were at around organisations who work with people who claim benefit, and how what people feel about that. You know, how other people feel about that. The stigma around it for them, but how other people feel about it. Not very happy that happens. So you've got that part of it. But the other part, which is your CEO for the CEO of Sleep Out view, is that also, you know, so charities have a role to play. Communities have a role to play. Philanthropists have a role to play. Industry has a role to play. And in a few weeks' time, I'm going to a breakfast which brings all of those stakeholders together. So people who are in this space and you know, have a lot of knowledge and experience around how do you change society for the better? You know, what does that look like? Because it's not just a government issue. Yes, government can change policy. Yes, government, you know, have a lot of power to wield, but it's not just a government problem. So how do you bring everyone else? How do you bring all those other stakeholders together? Industry, the sector, the public sector as well. You know, that, you know, not just schools, Department for Education. How, you know, Department for Culture, media and sport. You know, how do you bring all of those organisations together? The big grant makers as well, you know, the Children in Need, all of those organisations, the National Lottery. How do you bring everyone together to agree that there has to be a focus on how you create societal change? Because I think until everyone signs up to it, I think until, you know, everybody's all on the same page and we're all signing up and ticking the box that says, yep, we're in, you know, that we're taking ownership of this and we know the role that we need to play and we're in this together and we're all trying to achieve the same outcome, it doesn't change. So she's absolutely right. It is not just a government problem.
Yeah.
But we all have to take ownership, and taking ownership requires people to step up and do something. And that's not the easy thing to achieve.
No. And do you think from a charity sector perspective, because it's such a competitive environment, because the challenges are so great for each individual charitable organisation, it almost sets us up to not do that collaborative work because everybody's competing and doing a bit of this, you know, guarding their own territory?
Yeah.
A solution to that kind of not mentality, but what we all see and feel when we think of, you know, our charitable peers and partners.
Yeah.
One of the main reasons I love having this conversation is it feels collaborative when I'm speaking to lots and lots of different charities and shining a light on all their different challenges and causes. And I think there's so much power in that collaborative work and that, you know, bringing together of ideas and thoughts and minds, money, influence, all those things. That is where the power is, really, isn't it?
It is. And this may be a controversial view, but I think you have two sides to charities. You have the fundraising side of charities and you have the service delivery side of charities. And I've worked in large national charities. And I think often the competition comes from the income generation side of the charities. So it feels less collaborative because we're all competing for the same pound.
Yes.
So that definitely happens. And then you have, and there's a third, but then you have the service delivery side of organisations who genuinely are collaborative and often will be several organisations working with the same beneficiary group. And in that scenario where you have different agents, you definitely have to work collaboratively together because otherwise you can't provide the right service to that person. Well, whatever that, you know, whatever that person's needs are. So it's like the kind of person-centric approach, isn't it? Which is sort of, having spent 4 years in the NHS, we used to talk about this all the time. I'm not sure we ever achieved it, but it's the person-centric approach. It's how you get collaboration. So you put the person at the centre of your service delivery, and then everything else wraps around it. Right? That's how it should work.
Behind the organisation, really, isn't it? It's why are we here doing this thing? Because of that. Yeah.
That's it. It's not about the organisation, it's about the people you're here to support. And, you know, that's when things are tough and you're struggling, you know, way to see your true north, the way to see through it all is always remembering who you're doing it for. Not the organisation, not your board, not your team, but the people that you exist to support. And so I think there's a lot of collaboration when it comes to service delivery, especially if you take it from a beneficiary perspective. Not so much in fundraising, because there is obviously everybody's competing for the same pound. You will get collaboration, but that's usually larger partnerships where you have one major corporate or one major supplier and you're all getting a benefit from it. So, you know, it's a slightly different incentive. Where there is a lot of collaboration, which people don't talk about, is chief exec level in the sector. So I sit on a few different chief exec groups. And what I find hugely helpful about those, well, one, it's because you think, oh God, it's not just me. So that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also, we're all solution focused. Everybody genuinely around that table is thinking, how do you help the other person to overcome whatever the challenge is that they're facing? You know, whether that is financial, whether that is safeguarding, whether that's, you know, a restructure of an organisation, whether it's redesign of a service, whether it's, you know, challenging boards, not enough money, all of that sort of stuff. But you see a lot. I experience that. Like you're saying, if you speak to all the people that you're speaking to, I suppose are leaders in some form or other. I suppose maybe that's part of being a leader, is that you recognise that you don't have all the answers, that you recognise what good looks like as collaboration and learning from other people, and sharing of your knowledge and experience and expertise. I think that's what makes good leaders great leaders. And the people that I sit around the table with in the various sort of groups that I'm involved in, we're all very generous with that, where we are generous of spirit in terms of wanting to help each other. And I don't know where that exists outside of the voluntary sector.
That's interesting. In terms of the partners and the sort of funders, you talked about philanthropists. What are the most valuable partnerships to you besides people just opening up their wallets and saying, here's some money? Because I'm assuming that's not necessarily the most valuable kind of partnership.
I mean, it's really important because obviously, as I was saying before, we don't fundraise, we don't, we can't do the job that we do. But, it's interesting. So this morning I met with a very lovely woman who is on the start of her journey in philanthropy, I would say. And, when you're at the start of your philanthropy journey, it's about wanting to do a lot more than maybe you probably have enough hours in the day to actually be able to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's about connections. It's about access to things as well. So it's about, their knowledge and their experience to help you think about problems in your organisation and solving those problems. It's about genuinely believing in the cause and actually feeling that you want to make a change. So it's very valuable for us to receive donations. And some philanthropists don't have their time poor, but they're cash rich. And thank you very much for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But where you create change, and that's one of the questions you asked me earlier about change, like how do you make real change? That's when you have people who are genuinely interested in what you do and they have bought into your vision for the organisation.
Yeah.
Because in situations like that, and we are fortunate we have a lot of people like that who support the Childhood Trust because they really believe in our mission and what we're trying to achieve. They are actively asking us what else they can do to help us. Outside, they are already donating. What else can they do? How can they help?
Even a frustration that they want to do more. Yeah.
There's a genuine, we really, really want to help. But tell us how else we can help. And actually, sometimes for charities, believe it or not, that can be quite overwhelming because you do want their help and you do want them to engage with you more than just giving you money, but you have to be able to manage that and you have to be able to be available to accept that, and we find that, I used to find that a lot in the sector and still do, that there are a lot of people out there who want to help charities outside of sort of financial pro bono support, freelancing, giving expertise and advice, sitting on boards, all that sort of stuff. It's very challenging for the sector to freely accept that help because that comes with a lot of time commitment from the organisation as well. And it's how do you help facilitate that and make that happen where the charity gets the benefit and the person who wants to help feels fulfilled. And I think we, as a sector, we fall down in that. I don't think
is that an example of good stewardship as much as anything else? Because obviously stewardship is about thanking, but it's also about how that individual feels about their partnership.
It's about managing expectations, Dean. Okay. Because if you support a charity, so we're a fairly small charity. And so we can be very entrepreneurial for that reason, and we can be fleet of foot, and we can jump on opportunities, and without mission creep, without losing our focus, because that's really important. You don't want to lose focus on what you're doing. But managing all those relationships takes resource. Managing them all effectively when you have 3 fundraisers. How do you do that effectively? So yes, you can automate. Yes, you can use AI. Yes, you can create stewardship programs. But how do you create meaningful relationships with donors who want to feel fulfilled in their philanthropy when you don't have the resource to actually be able to do that? So it goes far beyond stewardship.
Yes. One
I
of the themes
think.
that's coming out in our conversation when you mentioned the word feel, when you were talking about the people that receive the benefit that you're providing, but also the people that want to support, they also need to feel something to continue to do that. So what I'm getting from that is that it's very important to see this process as a very human process.
Yeah.
It isn't
Yeah.
it is about us and people and our need to either want or our need to get that support and what that might feel like for those people.
It is, and it is whether, and actually, I think it's about feeling valued.
Yeah.
So it's whether somebody's giving £10 a month on a direct debit to a large charity, or they're giving £100,000 a year.
Mm.
They need to feel valued. So
Mhm.
as a donor to other charities at a very small level, but as a donor to other charities, it's just as important for me to feel that my £20 a month is doing something important,
Mhm.
whatever that is. That's
Mhm.
just as important to me as
Mhm.
somebody who's giving us £100,000, because we are relationship fundraisers. So we are relational fundraisers. That's what we are. We don't have the resources to mass fundraise. So we don't do
Sure.
public fundraising in the same way. So maybe we understand this space a bit better, but by understanding the space better, it means that we absolutely know that in order to do it properly, it takes resource. You cannot do it without that. As much as you want, as much as you try,
Mm.
there is just not enough hours in the day. So how do you do that effectively? This is the thing that we all grapple with. The kind of medium-sized charities, small charities, we all grapple with. How do you give the donor the experience that they expect?
Mm.
And how do you help them feel valued when you are short on resource to help you do that? How do you do that? What's the answer? I know. If I knew the answer to that, I'd probably make a fortune as a as a fundraising consultant.
I'll keep asking that question with the people that I'm
You should.
speaking to and see if I can get an answer.
Yeah, you should. Maybe somebody's got the answer. There must be someone out there who can tell me how to do that effectively
Yeah.
with limited resources.
Yeah. A lot of what we do in the charity sector is about the stories and the storytelling element to engage our donors, but also from a policy perspective to make sure that our cause stands out amongst all of those other causes. So is there a moment or a story that stays with you because it captures why your work really matters and the difference that your work makes?
I think so. I mean, I go uh, back to the families that we help direct. And I remember before I joined the organisation, I like you do when you're a chief exec moving into when you're an assistant chief exec moving into a new chief exec role, you end up doing work before you've ever joined the organisation, and most people do, don't they? Because you're kind of orientating yourself. And I remember going to a meeting, and actually this was third hand, but this is the power of storytelling from a fundraiser. So I'm sitting in the meeting with one of our corporate supporters, and my corporate fundraiser at the time was telling a story about a family that she had visited, who we were going to be doing a Transforming Spaces project for, who was telling her that her child has got type 1 diabetes. She has to keep the insulin at a fridge temperature, so cool in a fridge, in order for it to be effective.
Yep.
Her fridge kept breaking down. She didn't have access to a fridge. And actually, because the insulin injections weren't working properly, her son is now developing glaucoma and will probably end up blind. And I
Right.
thought, oh my God, I'll buy that woman a fridge. I was thinking, like, it's as basic as that. It's as basic as, do you know what? I would go to Curry's and buy that woman a bloody fridge. And I thought that, for me, and that story, it always sticks with me, because I think, for what would be a small contribution from someone to actually fix that problem would be life-changing for that family.
Right. Yeah.
And I was thinking, that is the power of storytelling, and that is the power of, from having been a fundraising director for most of my career before I became a chief executive.
Mhm.
That story always sticks with me. And I think, and as I was sitting there in that meeting listening to Joe talk about this particular family, I thought, that's why I'm going to be chief executive of the Children's Trust, for that reason.
Yeah.
And she really helped bring that to life. That is definitely the bread and butter of charities. How do you make those stories feel human and engage people in the cause without the stats that sit behind it? Because the stats are just the stats at the end of the day, aren't they?
Yeah. Thank you. That was really powerful. Thank you very much for sharing that story. Obviously, there's so many stories that you're experiencing and hearing, and that can take its toll sometimes, both on your energy, also sometimes your perspective and your ability to, I think you talked about finding that passion that keeps you doing the things that you're doing. What do you do to protect that? Because you're exposed to all those things on such a regular basis, so that you can keep that sense of drive, passion and purpose. Is there anything that you do personally to kind of to nurture that and keep it going?
One thing I've already mentioned is about having that peer network of other chief executives.
Yeah.
So that's really important to me, because even if it's just cathartic,
Mm-hmm.
just as it, oh God, I've got this problem, and even if it's just that. But the thing that always reignites my passion every single time is being engaged with other people who are just as passionate as me about we're trying to achieve.
Infectious, isn't it?
It's infectious, and it really re-energizes me. It's like I had a brilliant meeting yesterday with Places for London, who are part of TfL. But they're very independent, so they're very,
That's
like
Transport for London, isn't it, for anyone that...
Yes, for anyone who's sorry, Transport for London and Places for London are the part of Transport for London who are responsible for all of the estate.
Mm-hmm.
So, and all the buildings that go up on the land that is owned by Transport for London. And Transport for London, for anyone who doesn't know this, is the biggest landowner in London.
Wow.
I know, I learn, see, I'm always learning. I learn these things every day's a school day, Dean, every day's a school day. And, but yesterday I met with one of their senior boards. And it's only the second time I've met with her. And she brought one of our team with her. And right at this moment in time where fundraising for us is very challenging, where we're thinking, how do we see through the next sort of quarter, all of that sort of stuff. And I sat in that meeting with this woman yesterday, and she was so passionate about us, and how and the work that we do and how brilliant we are as an organisation. And I was like, oh, I'd kind of forgotten for a minute, because I was so caught up in the kind of the operations of the organisation and the day-to-day challenges that every organisation faces. And I really, after the meeting, I came out, I felt, because there's a real connection. You were saying about how do you create real change, and I was saying about, having people who really believe in your vision and that your values are aligned. And that's how it felt. It was a kind of a real meeting of minds.
Meeting of minds.
And I came out of that meeting really buoyed and thinking, that's why I do this job.
Yeah.
So I know why I do the job, because it's about the children and young people that we support. But what keeps me going when things are tough is engaging with other people who are just as passionate about what we do as we are, and remind us why we do the job we do when it actually is getting really tough. So yeah, I definitely feed off other people's positive energy about our work. So yeah, it's that.
So important. So thank you very much for that. I don't know where the time's gone, but we're very nearly at the end of our conversation. We've reached the quickfire round, just to not lighten things up, but just to kind of move out of the main conversation and the main topic of conversation. But in terms of you as an individual, are you a night owl or an early bird, would you say?
Honestly, Dean, I'm not sure I'm either. I think in my 50s now, in my mid-50s, I think that definitely my brain definitely works better in the morning.
Yeah, me too.
It definitely works better in the morning.
Yeah.
I do my best thinking when I'm traveling.
Okay, yeah. That's
because I'm commuting. I definitely do my best thinking when I'm commuting. And I definitely have to get more sleep than I ever used to get. So I'm definitely not a night owl. Not that I would love to be. I would absolutely love to be somebody who's still up at 1 o'clock in the morning and then can get up at 6 in the morning and go to work and be as fresh as a daisy.
Yeah,
that stopped happening in my early 30s, I think. So
yeah. So probably an early bird then in that case. And when you're waking up early or you're on that commute into work in the morning, do you take a cup of tea with you or a cup of coffee? And how do you take it?
Well, it depends. So sometimes I take a cup of coffee and sometimes I take a cup of tea. So it depends actually. So I'm a bit of a mix. It depends how I'm feeling.
Great, good answer. And what one book, podcast, or article would you recommend to someone working in the charity sector for a bit of inspiration or something? You talked about, injection of passion and enthusiasm. Is there anything in particular that stands out that you'd recommend?
I would definitely recommend a podcast and anything. If you ever see a TED talk by a lady called Brené Brown. So
Yes,
Brené
yeah,
Brown,
Brené Brown,
lots of people will have, she is she just cuts through all the bullshit.
yeah,
She just has a way of making you feel connected almost immediately. She can talk to anyone and she feels like she's talking to you, or
yeah,
that you can connect right away with whatever she's talking about. And she's such a wise person, although I'm sure she would never think she is and never say she, and never describe herself as that. But I would recommend, if you're looking for inspiration and you just want somebody to cut through all the BS, and
yeah.
Brené Brown
Yeah,
is
great.
the
I've
person.
certainly heard her work. It's a good reminder to go back to, I think. So thanks for that. And if you weren't leading the Childhood Trust, what other cause would you most want to champion if it wasn't children and childhood poverty,
Homelessness.
homelessness? Yeah,
Yeah, that is my other interest outside of work. So from a volunteering and wanting to do something about it, it would definitely be homelessness.
yeah, me too. And if this conversation's resonated with our listeners, or if they've been moved by it, which I've no doubt they will have done, where should they go to learn more about the Childhood Trust and the work that you do? I'm assuming there's a website, and it would probably have something like the Childhood Trust in it, but just to get the detail, that would be really handy.
Yeah, so it is the childhoodtrust.org.uk. And
Childhoodtrust.org.uk.
yeah, and actually, it would be interesting to hear from your listeners if they just typed in child poverty charity in London, whether our SEO is good enough to actually pop up first. It should, and it used to, but things changed. Algorithms change, don't they? And things
Yeah,
change.
they do. I'll do it. I'll test it as well.
No, do type in child poverty charities in London and see if we pop up first. And if we don't, we have more work to do. Is what I would
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
Great. Thank
but
you for
that's
that.
where you should go.
Reflecting on your journey so far, the word journey is overused, but reflecting on your journey so far, what are you most proud of having helped to build?
I mean, I would hope to replicate, I suppose, what I built in my previous organisation, which was an organisation that is at the heart of the community, that puts the community first, and is that convener of all of those stakeholders that we talked about earlier, bringing government and local philanthropists and industry and NHS and the education sector together to actually make a difference, and be that organisation that helps facilitate and make that happen. I hope that that's the legacy I left behind in my last organisation, and I hope that that's what I can achieve for the Childhood Trust in London. We're on, the previous chief executive of the organisation definitely set us on a very good footing to allow that to happen. So it's my
Yeah,
job to take us to
carry that
that
baton.
next,
Yeah,
carry that baton,
yeah.
take us to the next level. I think that's the idea.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you. And finally, what would you say to someone listening who wants to better understand the realities of child poverty and the role that charities can play in changing them? Is there anything beyond what we've talked about today that you'd want them to understand? We talked about where that passion comes from and the empathy. So I'm assuming it's about bringing them closer to the challenges and the issues so they can feel them.
I would say, from a practical perspective, for anyone listening,
Mm.
if you can, get involved in your local community.
Mm.
Volunteer. Volunteer for a charity in your local community, because that's how you get closer to the cause. It's how you get closer to the issue. And because child poverty, may not be your thing, it may not be your passion. But if you're passionate about helping your local community and affecting change, you can do that by volunteering. That's what you should do. That would definitely. And you know what? It's the thing that when we live in feels like a very terrible world where lots of what's happening is out with our control and we can't
Yeah.
change that. Do
Mm-hmm.
something you can change. Do that. Volunteer. That's what you should do. That will make you feel better about the world and will engage you with people that you think it's not all bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And it injects that sense of hope, I suppose, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. Yeah. There are lots of lovely, selfless, beautiful people in this world, not just the people you see on the TV and in the news.
Yeah, absolutely. Josephine, thank you so much for giving me your time today and for sharing your story so openly. I think what stands out for me is how your work sits at the intersection of urgency and then possibility, not just responding to child poverty as it is now, but helping shape what a better future could look like for children right across London. And it's a really strong reminder that grant making isn't only about funding organisations, it's about investing in people, ideas and long-term change. So listeners, if Josephine's story really resonates as it has done with me, or if you want to understand more about child poverty, grant making and the practical work of the Childhood Trust, do go and explore their work and see how you might support it. As always, if you're a charity leader who'd like to explore your own why on a future episode, then drop me a line at earlybirdphilanthropy.com. I'd love to hear from you. And next time on Night Owl Philanthropy Podcast, What is Your Why? I'm speaking with Sarah Hale from the Community Law Service. And we'll be exploring access to justice, the pressures facing people in crisis, and the role of legal support in helping individuals and families find stability and hope. And until then, thank you so much, Josephine. Take care, everyone, and thanks for listening.